Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. It's Monday, and we're on part 11, or little chapter 11, of Little Essays Toward Truth, and it is the little chapter on knowledge. Now, he talks a lot about Kabbalah stuff in this one in particular, and that's why it was helpful for the publishers to put this tree of life here on the frontis page of this little edition of the book. And the reason I'm pointing to it is this area right here. It's the area called the abyss. There is a sort of a shadowish sephira, an 11th one, if you will, called Da'ath, spelled D-A-A-T-H. And Da'ath is a word that means knowledge. It's like from here on up here is sort of the height of where your brain can take you, where your intellect can take you, where your reasoning can take you. And to go above that requires a complete disintegration of the machinery of the intellect. You can't think your way to Godhead, in other words. But anyway, so he's going to talk about Da'ath here, and he's going to talk about the Neshama. There's the 4 parts of the soul. Technically, there's subdivisions of it, but it's the Kai and the Yechida up here in 1 and 2. But then there is the Neshama, or the soul intuition, and this area here demarcated by this round gray circle. This is the Ruach, or the intellect. And then down here at the very bottom is the Nepish, or the animal soul. And they correspond to the 4 Kabbalistic worlds of Asiya, Yetzirah, Bria, and Atzilith. But anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Before we get started, though, if you were at our Constance and I had a little what we called a salon magique, because it just sounds fancier if we give it a fancy name. That was hosted over at 418 Lodge, or Oasis, here in Sacramento last night, or yesterday afternoon. Started at 4. And I would like to thank everybody that showed up there. It was very well attended, and it made us feel all warm and fuzzy, because it was the closest thing to a Monday night class that we've had in the 2 years since we've been to Sacramento, and everyone made us feel very welcome. And if you attended, I hope you enjoyed it. So, that being said, hopefully we'll do something like that again sometime soon. So we're on Little Essays Toward Truth, little chapter called Knowledge. Da'ath, knowledge, is not a sephira. It is not on the tree of life. That is, there is in reality no such thing. Of this thesis, there are many proofs. The simplest, if not the best, is perhaps as follows. All knowledge may be expressed in the form of S equals P. But if so, the idea of P is really implicit in S. Thus we have learnt nothing. And of course, if not so, the statement is simply false. Now see how we come at once to paradox. For the thought, there is no such thing as knowledge. Knowledge is a false idea, or however it may be phrased, can be expressed as S equals P. It is itself a thing known. There is no such thing as knowledge. Knowledge is a false idea. S equals P. It is itself known. No, it's like a double negative, in other words, okay. In other words, the attempt to analyze the idea leads immediately to a muddle of the mind. But this is of the essence of the occult wisdom concerning Da'ath. For Da'ath is the crown of the Ruach. Okay, that Ruach, the big gray circle in the middle. The whole thing is the Ruach. And Da'ath is the crown of the Ruach. It's not even drawn in there, but it goes right there. Now I lost my page. Okay. For Da'ath is the crown of the Ruach, the intellect, and its place is in the abyss. That is, it breaks into pieces immediately it is examined. You know, we could just kind of wrap up this whole 3 pages here when talking about Da'ath and talking about knowledge with this one sentence, and then we can go home. That is, it breaks into pieces immediately it is examined. There is no coherence below the abyss or in it. To obtain this, which is one of the chief canons of truth, we must reach Neshama. That's the second to the highest, and that Neshama surrounds there. It's across the abyss. It's the opening act of the abyss. There's only one level of the soul higher than that. They even call it the soul in intuition. There is no coherence below the abyss or in it. To obtain this, which is in one of the chief canons of truth, to obtain this, we must reach the Neshama. For this, there is another explanation, quite apart from the purely logical trap of S equals P, unless identical and therefore senseless. It is an affirmation of duality. Or we may say intellectual perception is a denial of somatic truth. It is therefore essentially false in the depths of its nature. The simplest and most obvious statement will not bear analysis. Vermilion is red, is undeniable, no doubt, but on inquiry is found to be meaningless. For each term must be defined by means of at least 2 terms, of which the same thing is true, so that the process of definition is always obscurum pure obscurius. Curiouser. No, obscurity leading to obscurities. For there are no truly simple terms. There is no real intellectual perception possible. What we suppose to be is, in fact, a series of more or less plausible conventions based upon the apparent parallelism of experience. There is no formal warrant that any two persons mean precisely the same thing by sweet or high. Even such conceptions as those of number are perhaps only identical in relation to practical vulgar applications. These and similar considerations lead to certain types of philosophical skepticism. Neshamatic conceptions are nowise exempt from this criticism. For even supposing them identical in any number of persons, their expression, being intellectual, will suffer the same stress as normal perceptions. But none of this shakes or even threatens the philosophy of Thelema. On the contrary, it may be called the rock of its foundation. For the issue of all is evidently all conceptions are necessarily unique because there can never be two identical points of view. And this corresponds with the facts. For there are points of view close kin, and thus there may be a superficial general agreement, as there is which is found to be false on analysis, as has been shown. From the above, it'll be understood how it comes that there are no trances of knowledge. And this bids us inquire into the tradition of the grimoires, that all knowledge is miraculously obtainable. The answer is that while all trances are destroyers of knowledge, since for one thing they all destroy the sense of duality, they yet put into their adept the means of knowledge. We may regard rational apprehension as a projection of truth in dualistic form, so that he who possesses any given truth has only to symbolize it in terms of the intellect to obtain its image in the form of knowledge. This conception is difficult. An illustration may clear its view. An architect can indicate the general characteristics of a building on paper by means of two drawings, a ground plan and an elevation. Neither but is false in nearly every respect. Each is partial, each lacks depth, and so on. And yet, in combination, they do represent to the trained imagination, as they are. No other illusions will serve the mind to discover the truth which they intend. This is a reality hidden in all illusions of the intellect. And this is the basis of the necessity for the aspirant of having his knowledge accurate and adequate. The common mystic affects to despise the science as illusion. This is the most fatal of all errors, for the instruments with which he works are all of this very order of illusionary things. We know that lenses distort images, but for all that we can acquire information about distant objects, which proves correct when the lens is constructed according to certain illusionary principles and not by arbitrary caprice. The mystic of this kind is generally recognized by men as a proud fool. He knows the fact and is hardened in his presumption and arrogance. One finds him goaded by his subconscious shame to active attacks on science. He gloats upon the apparent errors of calculation which constantly occur, not at all understanding the self-imposed limitations of validity of statement which are always implied. In short, he comes at last to abandon his own postulates and takes refuge in the hermit crab carapace of the theologian. A carapace is the turtle shell's little skirt around that. Elsewhere, he calls him something like bloodless spider professors in their cloistered. Well, anyway. But on the other hand, to him who has firmly founded his rational thinking on sound principles, who has acquired deep comprehension of one fundamental science, just one fundamental science, and made proper paths between it and its germains, which he understands only in general, who has finally secured the whole of this structure by penetrating through the appropriate trances to the neshamatic truths of which it is rightly ordered, the rightly ordered projection in the Ruach, to him the field of knowledge, thus well plowed, well sown, well fertilized, well left to ripen, is ready for him to reap. The man who truly understands the underlying formula of one root subject can easily extend his apprehension to the boughs, leaves, flowers, and fruit. And it is in this sense that the medieval masters of magic were justified in claiming that by the evocation of a given demon, the worthy octomonos, I'll spell it for you and then try to pronounce that again. It's super great magician, like great Houdini. Octinomos. Octinomos. Might acquire then I'll back up there. That the medieval masters of magic were justified in claiming that by the evocation of a given daemon, the worthy Octinomos might acquire the perfect knowledge of all science. Speak with all tongues, command the love of all, or otherwise deal with all nature as from the standpoint of its maker. Those are the powers and the magic goals of a Solomonic magician, or the grimoires. Crude are those credulous or critical who thought of evocation as the work of an hour or of a week. In order to do low magic, you have to be a high magician. DuQuette digresses. And the gain thereof to the adept, not the pure gold certes, nor the stone of the philosophers, but yet a very virtuous weapon of much use on the way. Also a mighty comfort to the human side of him, for the sweet fruit that hangs upon the tree that makes men gods is just this sun-ripe and soft-bloomed veiled globe of knowledge. And that is knowledge. The next one is understanding. Now, can you sort of see a pattern here forming here, at least toward the last? Okay. We've just done knowledge here, and that's the name of Da'ath. But right up here is Bina, which is understanding. And by golly, that is the next. That's the next chapter. So anyway, Again, thank everybody for showing up to our live event. We had a good time, and we talked about the well, technically we talked quite a while on why the hell people do pentagram rituals and stuff. But mostly we talked about the nature of the initiatory journey of the OTO, Gnostic Mass, things like that, and the Holy Guardian Angel. So we had quite an enjoyable afternoon and early evening. Anyway, until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself, be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.